Welcome to the Relationships Inside Out podcast with Doctors Gregory Siebert and Kimberly Murray, licensed marriage and family therapists. Join them on this journey as they explore the ins and outs of relationships.
Hey, welcome to Relationships Inside Out podcast. Today we're going to be talking about dating and red flags.
Yikes.
Yeah. And those red flags, how they also can carry throughout relationships.
Yeah. How so?
In terms of, we may not notice them up front, or we may not be willing to notice them up front, but how do we still keep an eye for those later? And how do we create boundaries if they come up?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think the important thing with the red flags is to first be comfortable with yourself.
Truth.
How do you see these red flags when there's a lot of stuff going on for ourselves that may kind of implicate that? So for example, if you're not really aware of your values and if they're being present in the relationship or not, how do you know that that's a red flag that they're not, right? If you don't know what those are. So I think with dating, a very important piece is going to be working on yourself, that self-growth. Who am I outside of this relationship? Ultimately trying to avoid this codependency, right? Like we don't want our self-worth to be in this relationship that I need this. I'm addicted to this relationship. It's a product of my emotions or my emotions and who I am.
Feel like a choice.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I think part of that self-growth is one, your values, building that self-worth outside of that relationship. So this is where you find like, who am I outside of it? And then spending time working on those parts of yourself.
Well, getting to know it. What's interesting is oftentimes our first dating experiences are also the times we're launching from our parents' home. And so our values get entangled in, what do my parents believe? What do they want? What do they expect? Yeah. And so coming to know, who am I separate from them first?
Yes, that's a great point.
To then know to separate yourself from your partner.
Yeah.
How do I feel confident about, for me, who Kim was when I went on that date was, say, my husband, who I was separate from him, separate from my parents, separate from even my friends.
Yeah.
And how do I protect that? How do I keep myself open and loving in a relationship, but also protect my need to honor my values, my need to have boundaries, to feel respected or whatever it might be.
Yeah, having yourself outside of this relationship. And I think when these things aren't focused on or paid attention to, I think a lot of us go into dating blindly, right? Until you learn stuff like we're talking about today or through experiences. But ultimately, when we're not conscientious of those things, those patterns continue to exist. We see those same patterns in relationships. This didn't work. These same fights and cycles happen, and kind of looking back at, well, what role am I playing? What is it about this cycle and my values or my self-worth that's playing a role into these patterns, right? Like I'm thinking about attachment insecurities. My partner maybe, for example, is distancing themselves when I'm trying to get something that my attachment insecurity says they don't love me anymore. And then that influences how I respond to them, right? So
which could be pursuing harder, pushing them further away, or it could be then withdrawing entirely.
Yeah, just so being aware of that stuff. And this is why I think working on ourselves is so important. How do we find out more about ourselves, grow, become healthy outside of the context of relationships? So it's not our only, product of self-worth before we get into another relationship. Like, are we in a good place mentally, ourselves, emotionally? Because with dating, we're vulnerable to rejection. There's a lot of rejection that's going to happen. It's not a fun time in that sense, right?
First impressions are everything. And we say that in kind of a cheeky way, but it actually lasts for years. Yeah. It doesn't just last for a night or a week. First impressions can make or break relationships. And am I ready to give that best first impression?
Right.
Or do I still have work to do? I often hear from clients, say like some of my ones that I've had that are divorced, even, well, this happened in my last marriage too, and I don't know why I keep attracting these men or women, or how did I fall for that again? And it's allowing time in between those dating relationships or marital relationships to really process, what was my role in that breakup or demise? What was my role in the conflict, in the distance, and being able to work with that?
Yeah.
Often we talk about breakups, clients talk about breakups, right? As they did, right? They did all the things, and I don't know how I fell victim to that. When in reality, it's both partners impact that.
Outside of the context of, say, domestic violence or something.
Of course.
But for the most part, everyone plays a role in that.
And how do you identify your role and work on that so that when you do decide to date, it's effective. It's healthy.
Yeah. I love going with couples that are dating or, newly dating, getting to know each other, a genogram, right? This is mapping out family patterns and looking at who are you in that family pattern. A lot of times they're able to look back at like, I'm my mother, this person's my father, in the context of the same patterns, right?
Maybe share a little bit more about what a genogram is for those who don't know.
Sure. Yeah. So it's a way to map out and through kind of assessment with a couple or an individual of just their family like tree. And in this family tree, you're mapping out things like health behaviors, things like that, or just health conditions, emotional disconnect, any conflict patterns. And when you kind of map it out, you're like, oh, aunt, whoever has a lot of conflict lines going through. And it just gives a picture of the family dynamics and a visual representation.
They're awesome.
Yeah.
I highly recommend that people actually look this up and give it a go themselves.
Yeah. And they're very informative. And especially like, again, with the couple, they're like, oh my God, I'm doing what my father did. And I think
I'm my mom.
Yeah. And there's some interesting stuff like research. If we look at the neurobiology of attraction, there's actually a book around that. And it talks about, we tend to be attracted to the things that were first consummated, right? So, as you're adolescent, you're exploring yourself sexually, what image did you have? And we kind of be drawn to that, right? And kind of an unconscious level drawn to these same things that we're used to. And this is where you see people, like say, for example, they grew up in a house with chaos, or maybe a parent used substances, and they might kind of on an unconscious level find somebody that's also using substances, right? I hear a lot of clients like, I married my father, or I married my mother, in that sense, right? Kind of like they're very unaware of that process, but they're drawn to that kind of dynamic, which I think is very intriguing. It's
familiar. So I talk about it with clients of sometimes what's familiar isn't necessarily healthy. It's just something we're used to.
Yep.
So my husband and I, when we got together, he came from a family that didn't talk about a lot. They kind of kept everything close to the chest and didn't talk about the hard stuff all the time. And I came from the opposite, a very conflictual family where we were every bit vocal about what we didn't like, and at times even physical. And then I entered into this partnership with my husband 15 and a half years ago, which is crazy. And those two worlds did not mesh well. And it came to a point when I was continuing this family cycle of yelling, gaslighting, shaming, all the things on my partner. And he said, I can't do this. Even in the first podcast I mentioned, that was the moment when he was like, you've got to get some help or I can't continue, because he could recognize this. His pattern wasn't healthy either, right? They're unhealthy for different reasons, but he could recognize in that dating moment of, this isn't going to work for me. And I had to do that work before we could recommit as a partnership. And it's hard work, no doubt.
Yeah.
But I hadn't done that self-exploration. I hadn't done that separation of self from my family. And it carried into my relationship and almost destroyed it, quite frankly.
Wow. Yeah. And that kind of brings up the topic. I'm glad you talked about that, because that fits really well into that next thing about dating, is observing the relationship. These red flags you brought up in the beginning. What are you willing to look at? And there are differences in relationships. I think 2/3 of relationship problems are typically due to personality differences. But this is what you're observing. This is what you're thinking of. Is this something I want to deal with? Is there a good balance here? And it sounds like kind of there was an observation for you two that it wasn't working at this time.
And I thought it was healthy. Right. Maybe not healthy, but I thought it was normal because that's what I grew up in.
Yes.
All of my relationships were that way. I couldn't figure out why I was losing friendships, why I had a hard time maintaining friendships. And then that was that moment when I realized, might have been normal in my household. Hopefully not normal for all.
Yeah.
But definitely not healthy. But I couldn't see that. I didn't know that until the reflection of dating came in.
Yeah. And that's why that self-growth is really important, right?
Yeah.
Because I've had couples come in and they fought, right? I'm like, well, what's going on? And they're like, well, we fought. Okay.
That's not a bad thing.
That's not a bad thing. So tell me about it. Was there, no violence? Like, well, my parents never fought. Well, they did. They hid it from you, but they weren't used to it. So,
or they hid it from each other.
Yeah. So kind of what they're used to also shapes their perception of how the relationship's going or not. And that's where that self-growth is so important, of figuring out yourself. Who are you? What's normal? What's not normal? What am I willing to accept? So when you go into this relationship, you can observe that, what are my values? Are they being able to play out in this relationship? Is this partner honoring them, and can I honor theirs, right? Is there too much differences like you're talking about or not?
And on the flip side, For my husband, it was not talking about anything. Could I reconcile having a relationship where we didn't talk about anything?
Yes.
No. And so then it became a mutual expectation of we both have to do work in order to continue dating, in order to let this relationship come back together. And that's I think a key part of dating is, are we both working on this? Are we both working on ourselves and continually, right? Like, it's not like I did the work, now I'm done, but this continuous process of trying to improve, trying to better accommodate my partner, trying to better accommodate my needs, walking more authentically.
Yeah.
Whatever it might be. But that's a huge piece of dating is, are you the only one working on yourself? Are you the only one trying to improve and walk in a healthy way? Or are you both doing it?
Right. That's that reciprocity piece. Is there a balance in that? And I think you bring up a good point of the fact that you both decided that you were willing to work on this. And I think when we're looking at red flags, observing the partner we're dating is the differences. Am I willing to fix it? Accept it or leave. And I think that's a choice when we're observing this. And then it sounds like in that case, that's an example of, we decided that this is worth it to fix it, to both grow together.
And we were only 20.
Wow.
We had only gone to college for 2 years. So our separation from family wasn't very big. And I can only imagine now for people who are having to navigate this long distance or virtual or dating apps, how much more complicated that can be. I work with a lot of clients around dating, and it's so complicated.
It is complicated. We all have different needs too, right? I think about fetishes. I've had couples that have very unique fetishes. I'm like, how did you find each other? And that's part of that communication early on. The difficult piece is first impressions can last 2 to 4 years. And the reason why they say that is because it takes around that amount of time to really be in situations that you can see your partner and how they're going to respond, to get a good sense of them, right? Oh, this is how they respond to stress. This is how they are with their family. With
grief, loss, financials, work.
Yeah, exactly. Do they like this thing sexually, right? Going back to kind of the fetish thing. But that's really important, is having that conversation dating of, again, your values. Who are you outside of this relationship? And what do you want to exist in there? Can they honor that? Is that going to be a problem for them? I think about some relationships with couples that I've worked with where one is super, super religious and another person isn't. And how is those differences? Tough. Yeah. And it can work, but talking about, is that something you're willing to work with? Right. We talk about red flags, and we think red flags, I think a lot of people use in the context of like, oh my God, they're a very bad person. But red flags are just differences that don't really align with you, who you are at the core.
Can I reconcile that my partner is more silly or juvenile in some behaviors? Can I reconcile that my partner yells or doesn't talk at all? Can I handle even things down to like the way they keep their home, the way they keep their car?
I need to see your apartment before we continue, or your home. Yeah.
But that's what I mean of this dating. We think of it as like just the first date, but it's a continuation of time.
Yeah.
And it's, can my values be maintained 6 months in, 12 months in, 15 years in? If they're not, what do I do about that?
Yeah. And I think this gets complicated when we talk about blended families, right? So, there's obviously the divorce rates over 50% for first, and it gets worse as for second and third. And some of the reasons for that are the fact that the patterns never change for that individual. But with step families or blended families, not only your values, but is this a good person and their value and how they've raised their family or how she's raised her family? And does it align with my child or children and their values and what they want and how they respond? Right.
So let's talk about some of those red flags. What are they? What should people be looking out for?
There is a lot of subjectiveness to what that is.
Absolutely.
Because, and before we get into that, the differences are okay.
Yes. Conflict is okay.
Like my wife and I have a good balance. We find our balance and our interest. I think I'm a really funny person and social. She does not, but there's a balance. So when we go out, right, then we tap into my skills a little bit.
Yeah.
But then I also tap into her for how to self-soothe, how to relax. Right. And there's good balance there. So not all differences are bad or a red flag. And again, it goes back to this idea, can I live with this? But I think something you brought up earlier, and I wanted to elaborate on, is you said gaslighting. I think that's a big red flag, no matter what relationship you're in.
So maybe share what gaslighting is so that for those who don't know, it's a buzzword right now, but a lot of people don't know what it essentially means.
I think of it as diffusing responsibility. So when something happens and there's a problem, I don't want to accept any responsibility. I'm diffusing all on you. Well, this wouldn't happen if you X.
Makes people feel crazy.
Oh, 100%.
And yet I think almost all people have used it at some point, right? Not even knowing it.
Yeah.
But when it becomes a pervasive pattern, and sometimes it can be hard to even recognize it's happening because you feel crazy. You feel like, oh shit, I did do that. Or what if I had done this differently? Or maybe they're right. And so it's hard to step back and recognize, wait, what they're doing isn't okay.
It's not okay. Yeah. And you know, what's interesting. This is where the self-growth is so important. Because if you grew up in a household where you were told it's your fault and you already have this narrative that it's your fault, you're not going to question that when your partner says that too.
Absolutely.
But recognizing as gaslighting, and two people play a role in that, even if so minimal, everyone does. And that's when, you know, we'll talk about in the communication podcast about accepting influence, even if it's minimal, to help kind of diffuse some of the tension and defensiveness to get somewhere productive.
Gaslighting's huge, and it shows up in family relationships, friendships, you name it. And if you aren't feeling secure in yourself, confident in yourself, knowledgeable of who you are, it's really hard to stop it or to even recognize it at all. And so going back to that very beginning of when it comes to dating, know yourself first, do that work so that if you get pulled into one of these patterns, you can hopefully kibosh it pretty quickly.
Yeah. What do you think another red flag might be for you that you've come across with clients?
One big one has been, how do I want to say, it's almost like a downplaying of personal values. So I have clients who will talk about their political values or values of family, and someone will say, oh, but do you really believe that? Do you really think that's the best choice? And just this continual questioning and minimizing of someone's values.
Oh.
And it's okay to have differences, right? Like I can look at my partner and say, like, politically, this is how I feel. And he can say, this is how I feel. And we can agree to disagree. But when it is a minimizing of who you are and telling you you're wrong or bad for that, I think that's a big red flag. And it comes up all the time.
Yeah, that is a big one. And it kind of makes me also think of, and along with that is a lack of reciprocity.
Yeah. So
that would be, in my opinion, a lack of reciprocity of appreciating each other's perspectives. But you brought this up earlier in terms of making sure that both people are working together. Growth, right? That's reciprocity. And understanding what that is somebody doing everything in the relationship and the other one's not? If that's the case, probably not a good sign that this is what there's gonna be a lot of burnout over time, right?
And with that, codependence. Often we talk about codependence in terms of like drugs or drinking, right? Of who enables, who uses, that kind of thing. But it actually happens quite more often than people care to admit. Of codependency is, I need my partner to function. I need them almost like as a crutch to exist in the world. And if we're feeling that way, that's a good sign codependency is present. And that is really unhealthy. I can need my partner's help in some ways, sure. I love his help with my girls, especially after a long day. But could I function without him? Yes. And can you really say that? Can you really come to truth that I can live without my partner? If the answer is no, we're walking into codependency, and that's where that loss of self comes in.
Yeah. Do you have worth outside of this relationship? Who are you outside of this relationship? Yeah, I think that codependency is a big red flag. It's really hard to pick up on or notice, and especially if someone grew up in a household with substance use and parents. Codependency is a big one. Right. It's usually often kind of a response or an adaptive thing, but it's not healthy. But then again, we talked earlier about, you find relationships where there's typical similar patterns, right? It's our homeostasis, our normal on a very unconscious level. Another one that I think is important, it's not necessarily a red flag, but it's really making sure you're not sensationalizing the relationship when you're observing red flags. We tend to look at it with rose-colored glasses. I think about like buying a car. When you've already justified buying it, you're not looking at anything negative. No, this is the one I want. There's a rust pocket in the back. I don't care. I've already justified it. And same with relationships. Be very cautious about Is my observation sensationalized because I really want this to work because maybe I'm codependent and I need this? And another thing that really complicates this is bonding chemicals, right? Vasopressin in men, oxytocin in women. And when we have sex, because things have changed now, right? People are having sex, then figuring out if we want to be with that person. Whereas, you know, a generation or two ago, it was, I need to meet this person, date, and then maybe, of course, this is on a general speaking, but when we have sex and those chemicals are high, those bonding chemicals, there's kind of like this heightened sense of attraction. Yeah. And that could be difficult, and being able to really observe and look at it. I had this one professor say about dating, think about it as an interview, and you're just monitoring the red flags as you go along. Of course, you're emotional, you're connected, you're doing those things. And when you're deciding whether to commit further, am I willing to deal with these red flags
for the long haul?
Yeah.
And I'll hear clients say things like, yeah, he yells or whatever, but at least he doesn't.
Yeah.
Or he is messy, which for some people, that's a really big value. He's messy or doesn't keep up with his hygiene, whatever it might be, right? But he's still kind to me in these ways.
Yes.
And then those same people come back around in a year or two of, oh shit, why didn't I pay attention to that? And so we get kind of swept up in only focusing on the good, that sensationalizing, putting them on a pedestal.
Rose-colored glasses.
And it's not that big a deal that they yell at me all the time. It's not that big a deal.
Yeah, excuses. Yeah, that's what we need very conscious of is, are we looking at those rose-colored glasses, or are we kind of being honest with ourselves? And I think a good question, and I talk about this in premarital counseling with couples, is this someone I can get through the shit with? It's not about who I can live happily ever after with, because you're going to go through life together, and life has a lot of obstacles. And is this somebody I can grow with? Right?
And it's a choice. We talk about love, even in a sensationalized way of, I fall in love with someone. I look at it more as, you're not really falling anywhere. Yeah. You're choosing. Yeah. And even, so my husband and I have been together for 15 and a half years and some change, I don't know. And every day is a choice. Do I like my partner every day? Sadly, Chris, I don't. I don't. He probably likes me every day, but I don't know that I like him every day. And so it's a choice on those days when I'm like, this man right now. Sure. But I'm still going to choose to go to bed next to him. I'm going to choose to wake up next to him, and I'm going to choose to try again. I'm going to choose to be vulnerable, to say what I'm struggling with, what I need differently, to ask him what he's struggling with, what he needs differently. Yeah. To improve it. And so part of the dating process, or the full courting process, is, can I choose to give that energy? Can I choose to show up for them, even when I don't like them, even when they're a pain in my ass? Now, again, going back to domestic violence, this, of course, is not including of that, right? If there's any abuse or violence, that's an entirely different conversation. Yeah. But if it's things like, he interrupts me, he is grumpy, those kinds of things, can I live with that? Yeah. Can I choose that? And that's part of the shit you're getting through. You're getting shit through external stressors of the relationship and things internal. And I think John Gottman points this out quite well, is that's something that's really important. And I think too, like, if you're going to get through the shit together, you need to have a solid foundation of friendship. Yep. That friendship is a very key component. Is this somebody that you could be really good friends with as well? Of course, having the romance with it as well. And how do we maintain both? Often as relationships ebb and flow, there's going to be periods when we're less friendly, but maybe more passionate, or more friendly, but less passionate. Yeah. But how do we not lose sight of both pieces? And you used the language love earlier. And I think this is interesting because this is part of something we observe, right? We love this person. When I was in my master's program, we went to Istanbul and we were presenting on research with the researchers there versus the United States. And we're looking at relationships, divorce, and love was not a construct in the top 10 reasons why they even got together. Interesting. So love was very westernized compared to them, right? That was not anything. Of course, there's a lot of cultural differences, but more importantly, I bring this up is we talk about love. It's really hard to define. So, what is that? There's got to be things beyond that. And this is where kind of the objective piece comes in, because I think we only focus on this love. We're really talking about that feeling, but is that feeling complicated because we've had sex? And is it kind of or because we're trying to get out of our parents' home, or because we just need someone? Yes. We need to have a partner. We have a hard time being alone. Yeah. Which is if we don't work on ourselves and kind of find ways to self-soothe, find kind of that confidence outside the relationship, we didn't fall into that trap. Yeah. I did want to kind of shift a little bit too, as well, is
where to find partners. I get a lot of those questions of where do I find people? I'm having a hard time.
It's so hard. Once you're out of school, I joke with a lot of clients, like school is the place to find your mate, because once you're out of school, it can be really difficult.
It can be. So, and as we talked about a little bit earlier, is the culture shifted. It's a hookup culture, right? Some of the research out of Florida State by, Dr. Fincham talks about the hookup culture and how these have shifted. That makes, so I think there's great platforms in the sense of dating apps. Right? There's people who've met there and have had long relationships that are successful. There's also a lot that are having a hard time because there's a lot of people hooking up through that means. And so it makes it difficult, but I definitely think it's a good route. Again, you have to do that self work and be a little bit more hypervigilant, maybe potentially of
be open to rejection. Because the reality is,
oh my gosh,
you're putting yourself out there for hundreds or thousands of people to, I don't know if it's swipe left or right, but to swipe on by you. Yeah. Can you handle that rejection?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Can you tolerate going on multiple first dates with different people to find that right partner?
Yeah.
So that's one option.
And I think that speaks to the self-worth piece, right? That's the resilient factor in this thing, is being comfortable with handling rejection. Another one I like that also plays into this self-growth piece that hopefully someone's done to understand their values is if you find a value of yours, say like your value of health and wellness, go do a hobby that embodies that value, and then find people within those hobbies. Or Christianity, somebody's a Christian, they're very much, that's their strong value. Go find groups that kind of embody that value of yours, to find people that have that shared stuff. Or
hobbies even.
Yeah, crafting or skiing or
fishing, hunting,
reading, trivia nights.
You know it.
The thing that I think is really important is finding which hobby you're okay to share. And the reason why is you may not want to share a hobby that's kind of part of your self-identity that you use to kind of, okay, when you're in a relationship, I need to go do this thing to soothe. You may not want to share that. So think about one that you're willing to kind of share with somebody and want to like travel. Like maybe that's one, but maybe you don't want to travel with somebody. You're like, I need to go travel by myself. That's who I am.
And that goes back to one of those really important points of in dating, my partner can't be my everything. They can't be my lover, my best friend, my pastor,
my wife that.
my everything. And that's a red flag and both a potential point of connection. Can I enter into this relationship and still keep parts of myself private, keep parts of myself for just me? Can I diversify my support network? Do I have friends outside of my partner? Do I have hobbies outside of my partner? And what do I want to share with them? So meeting them through a hobby, and what do I want to keep private? And is that okay?
Yeah.
Can we both give room for us to be independent people outside of our partnership?
And I don't think that journey of observing the relationship has to be alone and what you want to keep private. Talk with the person. What are their values? Right? Are you able to embody theirs? That's another part. If you're not doing that, maybe that's a reason why it won't work too. Being honest with yourself.
Another place is if you have people you trust, your kinship, your friends, seeing if they have friends, right? Because if you're valuing your friend, chances are you have shared values with them. And by extension, their other friends probably do too. Not always, but that can be another valuable way to meet people that might share similar beliefs or carry themselves in a similar way.
Yeah, that's a great one. As long as when it doesn't work out, the friends who introduced don't blame themselves.
True. Chris and I met through a friend. He was, long story, but he was dating my best friend and then wasn't. And anyway, but by extension, he was someone I got along really well with because she was my gal pal.
Yeah.
We've since reconciled, in case anyone wanted to know. But that can be another place where we can meet people.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great one because typically you hang around with similar interest groups with similar interests. Yeah. And I think it's tough. And the most important thing is it's going to be tough. You're going to experience rejection. Build your self-worth up, build your self-esteem up to help go through this process. But it can also be fun.
You put yourself out there. You can't recluse and expect your partner to show up on your doorstep. If you see someone at the grocery store or at the gym, maybe take that risk, but doing that self-work first. So when I take that risk, if it fails, I can be okay.
Exactly. I can be okay. Yeah.
This is such a complicated topic and it's ever evolving with online dating, but now even with COVID and can I meet people and be COVID safe or whatever it might be, right? And what does that look like for me, for them? And it is really complicated. So leaning on your support system as you're going through this, leaning on a therapist, leaning on other people to help you through what is a rather difficult process.
Yeah. Or lean on those hobbies that are part of self-soothing for you. If you love reading, go do it in a social setting with somebody else where you have like a book club and maybe you meet someone through that process, right? So very tough, but I think a lot of what we talked about today is prepare yourself, work on yourself, and be honest with yourself in the relationship, kind of observe some of the things that are not okay for you. And you're willing to kind of put that boundary up of, I'm not willing to work with this, or I am willing to work with this, but I need to communicate with them and make sure we're working on this.
Yeah. And crucial to keep that assessment alive. It doesn't stop after this minute amount of time. It continues until the day we separate or die.
Yeah.
We must continue to assess, are my needs being valued? Are they being respected and met? Is this the person I want to walk with?
Yeah.
And if we've decided to get married and for values, one reason or another, okay, I'm going to be with this partner for the rest of my life. How do I, if those red flags come up, how do I address them promptly in a way that is loving, but also yields some healthy results?
And not jumping into anything, right? In dating, Meg J talks about sliding versus deciding. When couples are dating, they tend to accumulate shared interests together. What I mean by that is they move in together, they bought furniture together. And so there's a little bit more interest or investment together that is not, well, since we did this, the next step is this. And I think there's a lot of social pressure of, well, you're together. So then you must get married. Well, not everyone has to get married to be committed.
Real.
And not everybody has to move in together or have kids, right? There's a lot of the sliding, and some of the relationships tend to be more successful if there's actually conversation that make decisions about the next steps rather than just sliding.
Being really intentional. That's going to come up in pretty much anything we talk about here, and in creating and fostering healthy relationships is intentionality. It's choice. It is continuous assessment. It is living in your authentic space and being intentional about the choices you make.
Yeah. And letting yourself know you deserve to be happy.
Truth.
You deserve to have your values be able to express in a relationship where, you know, the partner can be happy with them as well.
Such a complicated topic, but I'm so glad we're talking about it.
Yeah. Any last minute things that
you
can think of with dating? I mean, I'm sure we'll have other podcasts that kind of bring this up again, but
if anyone has any questions as we were talking about topics each week, feel free to email us. Shoot us that message, and we're happy to elaborate on something or give further advice. But I also recommend finding a therapist or someone that you can go to for this too.
And I think we also appreciate other perceptions, right? Everything we talk about is more of a general thing. There's always exceptions to that. There's always different experiences. And I love other people's experiences and how they might differ a little bit, because we learn too, right? We're not always the experts in everyone's lives. Actually, we're never the experts in anyone's lives. So
thanks, Greg.
Yeah.